The call came in just after 7 a.m. while I was reviewing cell response data in my home lab. My hands were gloved deep in pipetting cycles when the screen lit up Dad. I let it ring once more before answering. "Good morning, Izzy," he said, his voice polished and unhurried like he was delivering a quarterly update. "What's going on?" I asked, still focused on the microplate in front of me. "I wanted you to hear it from me directly," he said. "We're transferring the rights to the nanoshield IP to Ariel. She's going to oversee commercial development moving forward." I froze. "You're what it's already in motion," he continued. "She's got a stronger business instinct, and frankly, she stood by me when you were still figuring yourself out. She understands market timing." I slipped off my gloves, trying to keep my voice steady. "That's not your call to make." "Of course it is," he said flatly. "Langston Pharma funded your research. The lab time, the early materials, even your assistants paid for by us. You didn't build this alone, Isadora. It belongs to the company. I own the underlying methodology," I said carefully. "The delivery design, the core mechanism developed independently off company clock." He let out a short, humorless laugh. "You think a few late nights in your garage makes this yours? Come on, don't make this harder than it has to be." I opened my laptop and stared at the digital receipt from the U.S. Patent Office. Filed 3 months ago. Confirmed. Accepted. The filing number etched into my brain like a scar. "I hope Ariel enjoys trying to monetize research she doesn't understand," I said. "Good luck." A pause. He expected panic, rage, maybe tears. Instead, I ended the call and removed the USB key from my drawer. It contained every document, timestamp, lab note, everything Elena and I had prepared for this exact moment. By the time I texted her, he did it, just like we predicted. My hands had stopped shaking. I zipped the files into a folder labeled Langston Breakdown and started backing up everything to cloud storage, because if they thought this was over, they'd misunderstood who I learned resilience from. Before Langston Pharma became a brand, it was a black and white sketch on my parents' kitchen whiteboard. My mother, Dr. Camille Serrano Langston, used to outline molecular pathways while cooking lentil stew, talking through clinical trials like bedtime stories. She wasn't just brilliant, she was deliberate, building a company grounded in data ethics and a relentless belief in doing things right, even when it cost more or took longer. My father, Richard, was the smoother one. He wore the suits, spoke at investor luncheons, made people feel safe handing over their money. But it was always my mother's science that gave the company its soul. After she died, I thought we would carry that legacy forward together. But something in him shifted. The lab lost its heartbeat and the boardroom grew louder. Timelines got tighter. Risk tolerance increased. I thought it was just grief in disguise, but by the second year, we were cutting trials short, reducing transparency in our data. When I spoke up, he said I was being overly academic. Then came Celeste, polished, expensive, all smiles and vague references to streamlining vision. He married her 9 months after meeting her at a conference in Napa. Ariel followed shortly after, fresh from an online MBA program and already rebranding the company's digital presence. I remember walking into a quarterly strategy session and seeing her at the head of the table pitching ideas about AI-driven pharma pipelines she barely understood. I tried to stay focused on the science, on my team, on the work that mattered, but things changed fast. My lab access was restricted for compliance. My name was quietly removed from public-facing projects. Budgets reallocated. When I raised concerns, I was labeled emotional, disruptive, too close to the data. At night, I'd sit in my mother's old lab chair, the only piece of hers I'd kept, and try to remember why I hadn't walked away. Maybe I still believed I could save what she started, but now I understood. This company, our company, had been hijacked, its DNA rewritten. And if they were cutting me out, they were going to learn that I wasn't the one who'd been borrowing credibility all these years. The first time I told Elena what was happening, she didn't say anything right away. Just leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, staring at me through the webcam with the same calculating calm she used back in undergrad when she was dissecting case law while everyone else was cramming for finals. "You've been doing independent trials?" she asked eventually. "Yes. After hours. My equipment. My notes. No Carter funding. I've kept it clean." "Good. Start separating the data streams if you haven't already." You'll need a clean chain of custody for the work you're claiming as your own. I nodded. The methodology for NanoShield was refined in my garage, literally, all under my name. That's what we're going to file under, she said. Independent patent. Your name only, and trademark the name before they think to rebrand it. It took weeks to build the file. Every protocol, every time-stamped entry, every line of code from the software I'd written to track delivery behavior. I cataloged it all meticulously. I even brought in a third-party lab to validate the results, just in case they tried to dispute authenticity later. I worked late most nights running simulations on the makeshift bench I'd set up in the garage, my mother's framed degrees hanging above me like quiet encouragement. When exhaustion blurred my vision, I'd scroll through the emails I wasn't supposed to see Ariel discussing her upcoming innovation announcement, Celeste telling the board I was too emotionally invested to lead commercialization. Elena built the legal scaffolding while I built the science. She looped in a regulatory expert double-checked IP overlap and quietly ran conflict checks to make sure no one in her firm had ties to Langston Pharma. She even had me create a digital trail of submission backups logging every change, every access down to the second. I didn't tell anyone at the company, not my team, not the assistants who still believed in the mission. The fewer people who knew the better. I smiled through meetings, nodded in strategy calls, and let them think I was folding. But in the background, I was laying every brick of my own foundation. The final confirmation came in a 2:17 a.m. email USPTO application submitted. Pending review, timestamp logged. I sat back in my chair, stared at the ceiling, and let out the breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding for months, because they thought they were slowly erasing me. But I was already writing the next chapter without them. The shareholder meeting was held in Langston Pharma's new glass auditorium, sleek, sterile, and soulless. I sat near the back, uninvited but not turned away, just another familiar face no one had bothered to question. My badge still scanned at the front desk, at least for now. The presentation kicked off with projections and polished slides. Richard stood at the podium, sleeves rolled high like he was still the scrappy founder rather than the man who had just gutted his daughter's credibility behind closed doors. And now he said, turning to beam at the front row, I'm thrilled to announce the launch of our newest division, Langston Advanced Solutions. There was polite applause. Then a spotlight turned toward the front row where Ariel stood and made her way to the stage. Heading this bold new initiative, he continued, is someone who's already shown tremendous insight and leadership, Ariel Summers. More applause. Louder this time. I watched her take the stage in tailored white lips painted to match the Langston logo. She thanked the board through in a buzzword salad of agile pipelines, adaptive commercialization, and cross-market synergies. Not once did she mention science. Not once did she mention me. I looked at the stage at the chairs behind the podium where past project leads and division heads sat where I used to sit. There was no chair with my name. There wasn't even a pause to acknowledge my work on the very tech Ariel now claimed as a foundation for her vision. I sat through the rest of the meeting without moving. When it ended, people filtered out heads bent over phones, congratulating Ariel, shaking Richard's hand. Not one of them looked back. Outside, the air was heavy with June heat. I walked the long way back to the parking lot past the sculpture dedicated to my mother, the founder who built the research wing and whose name had been quietly removed from the website last month. It hit me then in a way it hadn't before. I wasn't being sidelined. I was being replaced, and I wasn't going to ask for a seat again. I'd already started building my own table. The notification came through Elena's secure server at 10:42 a.m., just as I was reviewing early-phase trial results from the polymer variant we'd modified in the garage. The subject line was short initiated transfer attempt flag triggered. I opened the document. My father had officially filed a request to transfer the NanoShield IP from Langston Pharma to Ariel Summers, citing internal strategic realignment. They had no idea the USPTO had already logged my independent filing 3 months earlier, with timestamps, third-party validations, and digital backups from 3 separate locations. The flag was automatic. The moment they submitted a conflict was registered. Elena's message popped up seconds later. They just walked into it. I'm prepping everything. Sit tight. I didn't feel relief or victory, just a calm, cold clarity. The kind that only comes after being underestimated for too long. At noon, I got a call from Langston Pharma's legal department. I didn't answer. Then a message from Ariel, "Can we talk?" There's been some confusion. I let that one sit too. By late afternoon, I was at Elena's office, sitting across from her as she laid out our plan in color-coded folders. She was composed as always, but there was a tightness around her eyes that told me she was already thinking 3 moves ahead. They violated USPTO protocol by attempting to transfer rights they don't legally hold, she said. That automatically puts them under scrutiny. Best case for them, this becomes a public embarrassment. Worst case, they open themselves up to an investigation. They'll go with confusion first, I said, then spin it as miscommunication. They'll say I misunderstood the scope of my contributions. Elena nodded. Which is why your logs matter. Your lab notes the receipts for your personal equipment, the off-site server backups. This isn't just a disagreement, it's theft, and the documentation proves intent. She handed me a clean printout of the original patent application. My name. My methodology. No co-signers. No corporate affiliation. I stared at it for a long moment before slipping it into my bag. That evening, while Langston Pharma tried to figure out why their request was being held in legal review, I returned to the lab and ran the same molecular sequence I'd run 100 times before. Only now it felt different, measured, certain, because they hadn't just triggered a transfer. They'd triggered the case I'd spent a year preparing. They held the press event on a Wednesday morning, streaming it live across Langston Pharma's platforms with a glossy headline, "Revolutionizing Therapeutics, a New Era Begins." I watched from my laptop headphones and seated at the same kitchen table where I first drafted the nanoshield prototype on the back of a napkin. Ariel stepped up to the podium in a pristine white lab coat, still creased from packaging. Her name was embroidered on the chest in a font that matched the new Langston branding soft teal lowercase approachable. Scientific theater dressed in PR. She smiled at the cameras, adjusted the microphone with rehearsed grace, and launched into her speech. Our next-gen delivery system uses targeted receptors to optimize therapeutic entry at the cellular level, improving precision and minimizing collateral impact, she read, stumbling slightly over therapeutic. I recognized every word lifted straight from my grant proposal. My diagrams flashed behind her as she gestured vaguely toward the screen, pretending to explain mechanisms she didn't understand. My father stood beside her, hands folded proudly, calling her a visionary and a leader for the future. I stared at the screen expressionless until Elena's message popped up. "We're filing the cease and desist now." She moved fast. The document was delivered within the hour, complete with my USPTO filing number, dated evidence of independent authorship, and a formal demand for immediate retraction of any claim associating Ariel with the technology's development. The live stream ended without acknowledging the legal notice, but the tone had shifted. Comments were disabled. Questions from journalists were cut short. One biotech reporter tweeted a screenshot of Ariel mispronouncing bioavailability, and it spread faster than anything in the Langston pipeline ever had. I closed my laptop and sat back, letting the quiet settle. They'd built their announcement on stolen language and borrowed authority. I had let them speak uninterrupted, not out of fear, but to give them enough rope to hang themselves. Now, with Elena's filing in motion and the public record shifting, I returned to the lab and picked up where I'd left off. Because while they played dress-up in borrowed coats, I still had real work to do. The interview was Elena's idea. I resisted at first. I didn't want to become a headline. I just wanted to protect what I'd built. But she reminded me that silence had already cost too much, so I sat down with the Chronicle, a quiet publication with enough reach and enough integrity to get it right. The journalist Simone asked questions that mattered. She didn't chase scandal. She wanted the full story, and I gave it to her. I talked about my mother, how she believed science wasn't just about innovation, but responsibility. How she built Langston Pharma not to corner markets, but to extend lives. I told Simone about the late nights in the garage, about the trial that failed so badly I almost quit. About the morning I watched a test sample hit a target cell with 98% precision and cried alone in the dark. I didn't mention Ariel by name. I didn't have to. The story ran 2 days later under the headline, "Daughter of Langston Legacy Speaks Out Why Science Needs Boundaries." It was balanced, but it didn't pull punches. It included my patent filing the cease and desist and a brief paragraph about corporate misattribution that everyone knew referred to the press event. That same day, Ariel appeared on a morning news segment, clearly a rushed attempt at damage control. She smiled wide and spoke quickly, name-dropping phrases like nanochannels and adaptive release. But it fell apart the moment the anchor asked her to explain how the delivery system differentiated between healthy and cancerous cells. She blinked, smiled again, then stammered something about customizable programming. The silence that followed said everything. Clips of the exchange hit social media within hours. Side-by-sides comparing her blunder to my interview flooded biotech forums. My inbox filled with messages from former colleagues, independent researchers, even regulators who quietly thanked me for speaking out. Langston Pharma issued a lukewarm statement claiming shared innovation. Elena drafted a response so sharp it left no room for interpretation. That night, I went back into the lab. The reaction rates on Trial 17 looked promising, cleaner than I expected. I noted the results, smiled to myself, and set the next cycle in motion. They had the cameras, the slogans, the spotlight, but I had the science. The FDA announcement hit like a fault line breaking open. What began as a patent dispute triggered a broader review of Langston Pharma's recent submissions. The agency cited irregularities in data reporting and accelerated approval attempts without sufficient clinical justification. Elena forwarded the notice to me the second it went live. I read it twice, then again, letting the weight of it settle. This wasn't just about my work anymore. It was about everything they'd cut corners to chase. Within a week, Langston Pharma's stock dropped nearly 30%. Shareholders demanded answers. Regulatory boards called emergency meetings. On the morning of his resignation, Richard stood at a podium in the same auditorium where Ariel had once claimed my work. His suit hung looser than usual. His eyes looked sunken. "I accept full responsibility," he said, voice subdued, practiced. "It's time for a change in leadership." He didn't mention me, not once. Celeste disappeared from headlines altogether, vanishing into the same shadows she used to control from behind the curtain. Ariel stopped posting. Her carefully curated personal brand fell silent. Investors pulled out of the Advanced Solutions division quietly, like slipping out the back door of a collapsing building. Elena called late that Friday. "USPTO officially confirmed your patent stands. They've closed the case on their side." I didn't say anything for a moment, just stared out the window at the city skyline glowing in the dusk. Somewhere across town, the company that had tried to erase me was crumbling under its own weight. "They came at you with everything," she said softly, "and you didn't just survive it. You buried them with the truth." But it wasn't revenge that filled my chest. It was something steadier, something clean. I walked into my lab, flipped on the overheads, and moved toward the whiteboard where my team had left their notes for Monday. Because while they scrambled to contain the damage, we still had trials to run. She picked a quiet place off the main road tucked between a bookstore and a dry cleaner. I almost didn't go. I told myself it wasn't worth it, but curiosity has a way of tugging at you when the dust finally settles. Ariel was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with a cappuccino she hadn't touched. No designer sunglasses, no blazer, just a plain sweater and a nervous glance that didn't quite meet my eyes. "Thanks for coming," she said, voice small. I nodded, sliding into the seat across from her, but keeping my bag between us like a line neither of us could cross. She exhaled hard. I wanted to say, "I'm sorry." For all of it. She looked older than I remembered, like the weight of everything had finally caught up. "I never understood what you did," she continued. "The science, the process. It always felt like a foreign language. But Dad, he made it sound like I could fix everything by stepping in. Like I could finally matter if I just took control." She wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. "I didn't want to steal. I just wanted someone to see me the way he saw you." I didn't speak right away. I watched her face, waiting for the performance, but it never came. Just quiet regret and a kind of rawness that wasn't polished for PR. "You should have asked questions," I said, instead of pretending to have answers. She nodded. "I know." I took a sip of my coffee, letting the silence settle between us. Build something real next time, I said. Something that's yours. She looked down, nodding again slower this time. When I stood to leave, she didn't try to follow. Outside, the air was cool, the street quiet. I pulled out my phone and saw a message from Elena waiting subject line Trial 18. Final results in. The package arrived with no return label, just my name written in clean block letters. Inside was my mother's old research notebook, its leather worn soft with time. I opened it slowly, unsure what I was hoping to find. On the first page in her unmistakable handwriting, she had written, "Never let anyone trademark your fire." I ran my fingers over the words, something settling in my chest that I hadn't realized was still restless. Outside, the sun was rising, casting long golden lines across the floor of the lab we built from scratch. No borrowed funding, no stolen names, just quiet, steady work. My team was already arriving. Voices soft coffee in hand, laughter echoing from the break room. I slipped the notebook into my drawer, took a breath, and stepped back into the space we were creating. One compound, one test, one purpose at a time.